May 3rd. And welcome everybody on this beautiful day outside. I don't know why we didn't schedule the meeting to be outside, but that's all right.
Right there.
Yeah, right there. Keep that in set up, but that's all right. We'll do introductions first. Sid Lyken, Lane County Board of Commissioners, current chair to my left.
David Reeser, Lane County, sitting in for Steve Moker.
Christine Lundberg, City of Springfield.
Hillary Wiley, City of Springfield.
Evan Newman, sitting in for Gina Grimaldi, City of Springfield. I'm Patty Giannoni, City of Coburg.
Ann Heath, City of Coburg.
Brenda Wilson, Elkhart.
Bill Johnston, ODOT. Franny will not be here today.
AJ LTD.
Gary Wiley, Lane Transit District Board.
Stephen Yett, LPD, sitting in for Kate Reed.
Lynn Taylor, Ministry Court.
Alan Zelega, City of Eugene.
We'll go to the audience. Carlene, do you want to start?
Sure. Carlene Riley from River Road. Ann Davies, Elkhart.
Alan Carter, Elkhart.
Can't call us here.
Kelly Clark, Elkhart.
Tim Goodman Comcast. Jeff Kern, City of Coburg. Andrew Martin, LTD.
Tom Schwetzel.
Teresa Brand, Point Point at LPD.
Paul Tolson, Elkhart.
Okay. Next item on the agenda then is approval of the minutes from the April 5th meeting. So if you had a chance to look at it, if we have a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Moved by Councilor Zelenka, seconded by Councilor Wiley. Discussion of the motion. Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimous. And next is adjustments to the agenda or announcements from any MPC members. Any announcements? Okay. Seeing none then, comments from the audience. I don't think we have anybody signed up. Or do we? Oh, we do. Okay. Looks like Tim signed up. So Tim, if you're going to just state your name and from where you're from.
Sure. From where I was born, or just where I'm from
Just
now?
where you're from right now and who you represent.
Give us a
I can give you the whole story, but I only have 3 minutes. So anyway, the short version. Tim Goodman, Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs from Comcast. Glad to see y'all today. Just a quick minute. Wanted to express my appreciation to the staff of LCOGS and the staff of the 3 jurisdictions that we provide cable service that are part of the MPC Cable Commission. Staff has been amazing, professional. We are promising to work with them diligently to get our franchise renewal done this summer. And just wanted to express how great it has been to work with your staff on the renewal. And then one last thing, for those of you who don't know, Comcast is now under construction with a new head end here in the area in Eugene. It's a little over a $5 million investment. When we're done, it's going to provide enhanced bandwidth for the provision of enhanced video services when everything goes to like 4K and then 10K or wherever it's going. And then also bandwidth for broadband. As of last June, every resident covered by your 3 jurisdictions where we have the service now has access to 1 gig internet service. And so that was a nice addition to our portfolio of services. So I just wanted to express that to the commission and say thanks again to your staff for such a great job in working with us.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Anybody else wishing to speak? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to the next item. And these are some of the MPO issues. First item is Unified Planning Work Program, addendum and funding. And so who is up on this? Looks like Brenda.
Thank you, Chair. No, we're actually going to have Kelly
okay.
step up. I
All right,
know
thank
that
you.
Paul is in the room, but I don't use this directive very often. I have ordered him to sit in the back row because he is ill.
Oh,
So if we have any questions, we can go back there and ask him.
okay, will do.
Thank you. So this is a request to approve Resolution 2018-02 and to adopt the MPO's Unified Planning Work Program. MPC held a public hearing on this item in April, and since then we've held a 30-day public comment period and we did not receive any comments. Just as a reminder, the UPWP is this UPWP is an addendum or an update to our 2018-2019 UPWP. The updates are minor in nature and a lot, for the most part, related to the timelines within the programs that we have and the projects that we have. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Questions? Seeing none, then this is a resolution, so we need a motion on this.
Yes, sir.
I'll move that we approve resolution 2018-02.
Okay. Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimous. Very good.
Thank you.
Second item is the amendment to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan and City of Coburg request to reprogram STBGU funds. And Dan, welcome.
Thank you. This is a request to approve the resolution 2018-03, which would amend the MTIP to reprogram STBG funds for Coburg Loop project. It was presented last month. The public comment period has since closed. There has been no public comment on this. Quick summary again of what it is. This project has been supported by MPC for $627,000 of STBG funds. What they're doing, this was for the Coburg Loop Path Phase 4 project. The request is to move those funds to a different part of the Coburg Loop that is making more sense for right now.
All right. Questions? The question I have is the unanticipated high costs. What does that mean?
Can Coburg speak to that?
The unanticipated high costs, well, I think that that would be that there is several stream crossings in the path that are going to be expensive, and that's the biggest piece.
Okay. Very good. That's one question I had. So this is again, it's a resolution, so we need a motion to approve.
I move we approve the resolution.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, quite a fast crowd today. So, is there further discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Here's unanimous. Item C is the amendment to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, and this is City of Eugene request to reprogram STBGU funds. And Dan, you're still up.
That's right. So this is a request to approve Resolution 2018-04 to reprogram $400,000 of STBG funds from the Eugene Seismic Bridges project, which includes seismic analysis for 13 different bridges. Want to move $400,000 of that to one of those specific bridges, which has its own project already, Coburg Road, Ferry Street Bridge, Willamette River Bridge project, just to keep all the funds for that one bridge together. Their public comment period closed. There have been no public comments submitted.
Okay. Questions? Gary?
Yes. I understand that by doing this, the City of Eugene will still be able to do all the evaluations on the other 12 bridges.
That's correct. That's my understanding.
All right. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, this is a resolution. We need a motion to approve.
I move we approve the resolution to shift the funds.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. A second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimous. Next item is the point-to-point safe routes to school program, FFY 19 funding, and it's not Paul, so he's way in the back, so welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Again, this is a request to approve Resolution 2018-05, which would amend the MTIP to program new MPO discretionary funds for Point-to-Point's Regional Safe Routes to School program for FFY 19. The request is for $143,288 of MPO's discretionary funds. This would just maintain the current level of Safe Routes to School K-8 programming in 4J, Bethel, and Springfield districts for that year. The public comment period on this has closed. There have been no comments received. Happy to answer any questions I can.
Any questions on this? Mayor Lumber?
I'm going to have Emma read this because she tried to read. We talked about it last month, and we have a specific point that we want to make. It doesn't have to do with this request specifically, but as we go forward, just a reminder about the future funding.
So with this request, the Springfield portion is smaller than what would be kind of a fair distribution across the region, but we've talked about how to make that a fair distribution with the upcoming requests that we'll talk about the second and third years, and put some additional funding into the Springfield Safe Routes program so that it fairly distributes the funds for safe routes to school across the metro area.
Okay.
Thank
Appreciate that. Right. Further questions? Okay, again, this is we need a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Second.
All right, I think the weather must be getting to us or something, so. We have a motion to approve.
Moving too fast.
Yeah, well, sorry, I know we're still eating.
Really?
All right, we have a motion to approve in a second. Is there further discussion? The only thing I'll add, and so Brenda, you heard what the city of Springfield's asking for?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we have those, yeah, that part dealt with, or noted. All right, so call for the vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimous. All right. Kind of moving right down this one. So item E is legislative priorities discussion. And I'm guessing Brenda's doing that.
Yes, I
so,
will.
all right.
Thank you, Chair. So we've provided you with a copy of the priorities from the last session as sort of a starting point. I know it seems like we just got out of legislative session, but it's time to prepare for the the calendar year 19. It's budget season, legislative session. And so we were able to obtain some things in House Bill 2017, like additional transit funding, including youth passes, some safe route to school. But some things didn't come out of the legislative session or the bill as we had hoped, like dedicated funding for seismic upgrades and that sort of thing. So we wanted to begin the conversation now and talk to you about what you might want to consider as priorities from the MPC. Last week at OMPOC, we began this conversation there as well, and they have brought some issues forward that they would like to look at further and possibly get into the 2019 session. For instance, the current gas tax phasing, as everyone knows, gas tax went into effect this year, and it will be there will be additional gas tax that's phased in. The next one will be an additional 2 cents in 2020, January 2020, but that has a lot of restrictions on them and things that need to occur before that 2 cents actually is implemented. One being that the Interstate 205 Active Transportation Management Project and the Interstate 205 Corridor bottleneck project have been completed. So if those two projects have not been completed, House Bill 2017 says the 2 cents doesn't kick in. So perhaps relaying the need and more flexibility on making sure that that 2 cents kicks in. Or even an increase. We know that that was a big lift. The original request was to go big, and it wasn't as big as some people had hoped, so that's always an option. More transit funding, dedicated sources for transit funding, like, and I'm gonna say the word just once, no booing, tolling. Preservation and maintenance funding. One of the elected officials at OMPOC made a good point in that if we can't maintain and preserve the infrastructure that we have, it makes it really difficult to go out to the public and ask for funding for new projects. Remove the constitutional restrictions from gas tax funds. Question on whether or not the new privilege tax is constitutionally restricted to road maintenance and preservation now. That's actually in the legal process, so we'll get more information about the constitutional restrictions, I think, once that question is answered, but that was something that was brought up. a change to the distribution formula. So right now, it's 50-30-20, so somebody brought that up, and I know we've talked about that before. Dedicated funding for ADA compliance requirements, more active transportation funding, cap and trade, a more collective approach, and there was some discussion about making sure that all MPOs are on the same page prior to the legislative session. A very good example of that, you'll remember, is taxing authority and the taxing districts. That was a proposal that came out of the metro area region and was only meant to be implemented in the metro area. It got put into the bill at one point and applied to all MPO areas without a lot of guidance or information about how that would work or who would have that taxing authority. So just the discussion at OMPOC about making sure that we are all talking from the same point and that we're all moving in the same direction. We've asked that the lobbyists from Metro come to OMPOC at some point to talk about things that Metro might be pushing forward. So we'd like to be able to provide that same type of information at that time. But that's just what came out of OMPOC last week, and I'm happy to begin the conversation now or get back to you with more information, however you'd like to handle this.
So I have a question, and it's regarding the I-205. So if you could present that in a little bit, I'd like to have that in email, and the reason why is because on Monday the 14th is AOC Day, and so at the committee that I co-chair, we are going to have Travis Brower and Chair Boehne talk about the implementation and what's going on with House Bill, with the transportation package. Commissioner Savas from Clackamas County is going to be in the room, and so it'd be good just to have information on this guidance piece here, because I think we're all counting on that 2 cents.
Yes.
And that's very important. I mean, that's been an important part of Lane County with our budgeting. We're counting on that. And so it'd be good just to have that information, so when they come to the especially with Travis and Commissioner Boehne, but I'd like to hear from Commissioner Savas as well, from Clackamas County, say, okay, tell us what's going on with what's happening here with 205.
Yes.
Where are you in the process? And so we can begin, you know, if we need to push on folks, so be it. Because while it's 205, 2 cents affects everyone.
Correct.
And so if you could maybe outline that, and probably just send it to the group, I think to the entire, but I'd like to have it in my hand, so when I, in Salem here in a couple weeks, I can sit down with my colleagues and say, don't hold this up. We're counting on
Absolutely.
it. So
Yes.
I would appreciate that.
Absolutely, we'll get that to you.
Is there any other questions? Because this is very good. And thank you for writing it out. A couple pages here, so I really appreciate it. But this is constantly a moving target, and just because the bill gets passed, you still have to implement it.
Right.
And so we're going to get it. I'm glad we're going to get it. Travis in particular is going to be coming before committee and tell us where we are in the process. So appreciate this. Good information. Any other questions?
I have one.
Patty?
Is there any discussion at the state level about including the airports in the transportation funding, since they were left out last time? Yeah, last bill.
Airports, as far as,
I don't know, I just know that from the Lane Act, the woman that's on that board said that the airport funding just fell off the table somewhere in the last process, and so, do you know more than I do, Bill? about that?
I remember this discussion, and I remember Commissioner Lykin commenting quite accurately when we had a presentation for the core grants, you may remember, and Commissioner Lykin and others were surprised to learn that there wasn't a source of funding in the package for airports. So I do recall that discussion. That would seem to be an appropriate topic.
right, and Connect Oregon also went away, and Connect Oregon was a source of funding for airports as well.
It was a big
Yes.
source. Paul, I know you're all the way in the back, but do you have any?
I think I'm safe if I stay back here.
Okay.
So this is 2 months old or so, the Oregon Transportation Forum, and its last meeting had the legislative leadership there and was discussing priorities for the 19th session. And the 2 priorities that the legislative leadership indicated they wanted to pursue were aviation funding and Connect Oregon funding. The next transportation forum meeting is next month, current legislative days, and we'll see if that's updated, but it is on radar.
Good to know. Questions? Mayor Lambert?
Well, Paul just brought up the transportation forum, and they typically have a great deal of input in terms of what's coming up. So is there anything else that they see that's going to be something that's discussed? It's always helpful if we can join other organizations, forums, et cetera, in terms of what we want to see in terms of legislative action, and they are a key group that gives input to the legislature about what is going to be discussed at the next legislature and what, potentially might pass. So I don't know if, we can get a report or since there's a meeting coming up. But I would be interested to know where are they at now this time around?
Yeah, Paul regularly attends those meetings. There's always the Oregon Transportation Forum, which is a statewide transportation group made up of public and private representatives that Paul attends as well. There's AOC, there's LOC that we're keeping track of what their priorities are and how those are being developed, and we can, as we get closer, we can make sure that we're bringing that information to this group so that you know what's being talked about in other areas and statewide, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Gary?
Yes, Sid. From the transit perspective, we got the federal highway bill passed, that type of thing. But yet, the competition there is only getting harder and harder and harder. And the local support and the state support of transit has been so helpful. And I only see that becoming more important, not less important, for us in the transit industry, because it's not as sure as it used to be on the federal level. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, Brenda, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so item F is follow-up next steps. First of all, ODOT update.
Franny wanted me to mention two brief items. We have additional information coming from the director's office regarding the leverage program. We had a presentation at the last Lane Act meeting. There'll be additional information coming soon. But the schedule involves ODOT staff is identifying the 150% fix-it list. And you may remember that we'll be looking for opportunities to leverage other projects off of these fix-it and safety packet projects. So that's coming forward in May and June. She also wanted me to mention that we will be having a ribbon cutting ceremony sometime soon. I need to get more information and an email out to everybody. This is for the new bike path in the I-5 Beltline intersection that's been in the news recently. So we're excited about that. Ribbon cutting ceremony, as I mentioned.
Very good. Next item, Springfield Main Street safety update.
Might still be, yes.
I think I mentioned at the last meeting that we had finally executed the contract, and we're jumping in right away. This afternoon is our first project management team meeting, right across the street, all afternoon long to talk about it. And I think the Springfield staff is preparing for a city council briefing coming up soon.
Okay, very good. Rail update, anything? Okay, Brenda?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure people knew that at the end of the 2018 legislative session, the Washington legislature on the very last day allocated $750,000 to a study to do further analysis of ridership, possible alignments their goal is to cut the time from Seattle to Vancouver, which is now about 4 hours, down to an hour. Portland to Seattle, which is about 3.5 hours, down to an hour. Tacoma to Seattle, which is about 40 minutes, down to 10 minutes. And Tacoma to Portland, which is about 3 hours, down to 30 minutes, using different alignments and speeds. And that report is supposed to be back to the Washington legislature by June 2019, and so we'll keep an eye on that because it will impact our rail as well, so.
Hillary?
Yeah, how does that fit in? I was on the governor's commission on high-speed rail, and we'd spent a lot of time looking at routes and whatnot. And of course, we had problems with the, around the Portland area.
Correct.
You know, whether to go through the hill, how do you get through that area? But, is that, do you know if our final report would help plug into Washington's work? Or do we need to, I have a hunch we need to do a lot more work.
It does plug in, Counselor. They're going first.
Yeah.
And so they have dedicated funding for this project. They're allocating funds for the studies. They're going first. I think we'll be able to learn a lot from them. And then our final report that came out of that commission will lead that project in the state should that happen. And as you know, most of the issues were in the Portland area.
Yeah.
And so the state of Washington had a lot of those same types of issues, and they're addressing them in various ways. So I think we'll learn a lot from them.
Yeah. I think, in retrospect, that our report needs a hard look by the engineers and the cost, and the cost effectiveness and the sharing with the rate, with the freight. And that's probably the biggest single problem in getting a high-speed passenger system going, is that we have to share the rails in many places with the freight. And the freight has priority, and so the passenger needs to have its own rail bed, even if it's side by side. But that's something that, those are some of the main issues. But it's just one of the most exciting things to work on, so well, let's hope it goes ahead.
Yeah, I think for our report, one of the main things that came out of that was the choosing of the alignment,
Yeah.
the route.
I
Yeah.
think that needs to be looked at by the engineers. Thanks.
And would it be an accurate statement to say that the Washington legislature seems to be a little bit more supportive of passenger rail than the Oregon legislature?
Sure.
I'll leave it at that.
You can say it.
I think it's a very accurate statement. That's just me.
Very accurate.
Absolutely, Commissioner.
We'll leave it at that. Okay. One other thing on rail updates. So I think the decision will be made here probably in the next couple of months on the funding for the reload facility. And Lynn County seems to be the clear favorite, but can we just maybe follow that and see if there's a timing and maybe report back just to kind of so we can get an idea? Very good. Appreciate that. Thank you. Next item, OMPOC update.
Oh, I think Brenda hit on, a lot of what we talked about. We talked about the legislative session coming up. We did have several reports. I'll just hit on one or two things that I took a note of, is that in the TPR that they are looking at changing parking requirements to reduce what is actual demand in the residential and commercial. Because I've often thought, it's the only place around here that it really changes how people drive is around the University of Oregon, because there is no parking. But the trade-off in other areas is if you don't put in enough parking that goes with a location, is then people park in the residential areas. And so you start causing conflicts. But I know, because we're looking at how the heck do you get more people to ride the MX bus out in the Gateway area, is we have a ton of parking out there. So why the heck would somebody not just drive? Except that maybe Beltline is backed up so far that it would make more sense. So how do you go about doing that? And I thought, well, you get rid of a lot of the parking. And then I was thinking there's not a lot of residential. People are going to have to get on the bus. But I thought it was interesting that we do take a serious look at what we need in the way of parking and how much we put in, because that's such a big part of any discussion about any development that goes in, is how much parking has to go along with it. So that was one thing that I made a note about, and I'm trying to think. We talk a lot about transit also, so I'm looking to you, Brenda, for other things that were.
No, nothing that really stood out.
Yeah, but I think it's a good concept that they're taking a look at some of those things, and that the rule changes, somehow or another, I wrote, ODOT doesn't stand in the way of our getting things done, so that would be a welcome move, so. And not to blame, I'm just looking at you and not blaming you. But anything that would help us to be able to move through our processes in a timely fashion, because there's, you want to get something done. And one of the first things you have to do is your transportation study, so that you can actually move to taking a look at seriously at what development you can do. So however we can make those work smoothly would be most welcome.
There's local ODOT, and then there's Salem ODOT.
Yes, and we made the distinction, definitely, yes.
Our evil twins in Salem.
Yes.
White hats? Not white hats.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, next is Lane Act, so Bill?
The next meeting is next Wednesday, May 9th. Are a couple of public transportation topics. Our very own Aurora Jackson will be talking about the Oregon Transportation Improvement Fund, TIF, we call it. And she will also be talking about the Oregon Public Transportation Plan. And Franny will be talking about the ODOT Strategic Business Plan as well. Those are the main topics.
Very good. Questions? All right, next item is MTIP Administrative Amendments. The attachment is in your packets. So if you have any questions, and then our next meeting will be Eugene Library, Basket Tyson Room, and so that's June 7th. Unless it'll be outside, I don't know. Yeah. So that'll be the next meeting, and looking forward to that. Anything else for the good of the order?
Cable Commission?
Yes, I will.
Commissioner?
Yep,
I have one update.
okay.
I just received this. The OTC has chosen, or the governor has appointed the OTC Commissioner for the vacancy. It is someone by the name of Martin Callery from North Bend. So again, no one from our area.
Actually, that's actually a good thing. I know Martin
You know Martin?
extremely well, and Martin will, in fact, Martin used to serve on the act here representing rail. So actually,
Yes.
he's a person that we would like to have.
Excellent.
And for a default, so I will tell you that Martin is a good guy and knows Lane County very, very well. So we're actually in good hands.
Excellent.
On that, so it's about time we have somebody who represents either the coast or the Willamette Valley. And it's been a long time waiting, so that's actually not a bad choice. So know Martin extremely well. Okay.
Maybe we should send a letter of congratulations.
Actually, that wouldn't be a bad idea, because
Because he is a good guy.
He-
I met him, yes. And they made a good choice.
Yeah, and he was involved, he's worked for the Port of Coos for many years as well, so he actually has a strong relationship with Lane County. And,
I'd be happy to draft a letter up for
Yeah.
your signature.
Alan?
I don't have a problem with a letter of congratulations to him, but I think we should send one to the governor
Yeah.
that says, yet again, we're disappointed the second most populous part of the state has no representation
Yes.
whatsoever on
That's
the
true.
Here,
OTC.
here.
That's true.
And that this has been a problem for decades, where we had a short respite of relief when we had Mark Fromeyer on, but he was only on for like a year. Other than that, this area goes unrepresented yet again.
Yeah, Randy Pepe was the last person who represented us.
Yeah, that was 20 years ago.
That was a long time ago. Yeah.
Almost.
2 letters?
You want
Sure.
2 letters?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine, yep. All right,
Okay.
but I will vow for Martin. Martin he'll watch out for us, so.
In the paper this morning, there was an article about some appointments of individuals. And I think we have a new
Public Works.
Director of Public Works for the City of Eugene. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Very good. Believe me, we have time. All right, anything else? Then at this time, then I will adjourn the MPC meeting. And for those from jurisdictions not part of this, you're free to go and enjoy the sunshine or whatever you're going, whatever the case may be. And I'll wait, let's just recess here for a couple minutes and before we call the commission meeting. We will call to order the Metropolitan Cable Commission. And first of all, we want to welcome Ann Davis. And so we will turn it over to Brenda. I don't know if you have opening statements or just want to turn it over to Ann.
Hand it right over to Ann.
All right. Welcome, Ann.
Hello, I'm Ann Davies. I'm LCOG staff for the Metropolitan Cable Commission. And I see I have an hour and 20 minutes. Usually I have 2 or 3, so sit back, get comfortable. We're going to talk about franchises for a while.
Where's my pillow?
Did you stream something?
I was going to tell them that Sarah cannot give a speech because I'm going to fill up all this time.
Oh, okay.
So there's 2 issues that we're dealing with right now with Comcast. And first of all, I wanted to thank Tim for his kind words. We've been working pretty hard trying to get this renewal done and the fee review settled. There's been some delays, and so I wanted to address that first. The current franchise is due to expire August 1st, which is like tomorrow in local government world. I'm not confident that that will actually get done by August 1st, but I think we have agreement with Tim that we're going to figure out what that means, which was probably an agreement that we will continue under the current franchise until we get the renewal figured out. And that may be something that we need to bring to you in the next month or 2 to just confirm that we're good to go on that. I don't see that as an issue because both parties are working pretty hard to try to get this thing done, and we're very close. So the last time we came to you was last fall, gave you an update of where we were on the negotiations. Since then, we've only met a couple of times because there have been some staff changes at Comcast and other issues came up. No one's fault, really, just kind of got delayed when we were just starting to get going again. So what I've given you in your packet is a memo, a table of the fee review piece of it, a table that summarizes the issues that we're dealing with in the renewal of the franchise, a proposed addendum that's called competitive equity addendum, and then some customer service provisions. We'll be looking at all these today. So first of all, the fee review is something that we're pretty close to agreement on. That's that first table. What we did is we had a consultant look at the franchise fees and come up with
their numbers of what would have been appropriate for Comcast to pay for those franchise fees during the term. Comcast came back with some different numbers, so we're going back and forth. The negotiations with the fee review and the franchise renewal we're doing together. So as there are provisions in the franchise renewal that come up, we're negotiating around the money in the fee review, but we're pretty close. Last time there was a renewal franchise fee review, we ended up at about 6 cents on the dollar, and that's kind of market. That's kind of what happens. Sounds kind of off to me, but now that I'm doing it, that's what goes on. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're in a pretty good place around that. The main issue with the fee review is one of the main issues in the franchise renewal, and that you will see on this first chart, item B. It's called multi-service revenues. I tried to explain it kind of briefly in my memo, what the discrepancy there is. If you have any questions, please ask. I'm going to just try to explain it briefly because I think you need to understand where these numbers are. If you go across that B column to the total of what's Ash Pond School Co. is the ANS report, you see 139,950. That's in that one, the fourth column over. That's the number that consultants indicated they thought was underpaid for these multi-service revenues. And what that is mostly late fees that Comcast has charged, that our consultants think all of those late fees have to be counted as fees. And Comcast obviously thinks no. What they're proposing to do is take the percentage of cable services to all the other services and separate out those late fees in that way. So we have two very different ideas about what's the appropriate way to do it. Staff actually thinks there's probably a defense for both of those positions. So that number is getting rolled into the fee review, but it's also a part of the franchise renewal because Comcast wants to put something in the new franchise that spells out how those get divided. And they want to put in there that we're gonna do the percentage. However much cable services is percentage of the total services, that's how much of the late fee is going to be counted. Ash Pond School Co. is still taking the position advising us that we should say, no, all of those late fees should get counted because late fees are not attributable to particular services. They're just a late fee. So that's the big issue that we're dealing with not only in the fee review but also in the franchise renewal. So that's the issue you'll see on page 2 of the memo that's under gross revenues because that's where that issue comes up, is defining what gross revenues are and what this franchise fee percentage is going to be calculated on. Are there any questions about that? No? Okay. So staff's still sitting down trying to figure out whether we're going to agree to put that into the new franchise or not, or whether Comcast will maybe agree with us to not put it in and then we'll be arguing about it again the next time. So there's a couple of issues like that where we have been wanting to put something in the franchise to clarify it for the next time so we're not sitting here arguing about it in 10 years or 5 years or whatever, and vice versa. Sometimes we may come up and say, okay, well, we're not going to put that in the franchise because we can't come to agreement and we'll just fight another day about it. So there's issues on both sides with that. Another issue is the customer service center in Springfield. It's another one of the big issues. Neil Obringer is here to answer any questions that I can't answer, or if I misspeak, hopefully someone from Springfield will stand up and say, no, that's completely wrong. But what happened was, go ahead, you can say it. So during the term of the current franchise, actually, Springfield's service center went away. Comcast took that service center away. And so now there's only one in Eugene. The current franchise still says there's supposed to be one in Springfield and one in Eugene. So when that service center went away, Comcast paid a fee to Springfield to remove that service center. The requirement for a service center in both cities is still in the franchise. So what we proposed was if they're not going to put a service center back in Springfield, we proposed that a payment be made to Springfield to compensate for the removal of that service center. Staff came up with a number, and we've been negotiating around that number. And then staff decided it was probably wise to go back to Springfield City Council to figure out what was appropriate to do. And it was mainly around a request by Comcast to use a portion of the money for an ARC of Lane County project. And so it went back to the City Council in Springfield, and Springfield decided that that ARC project was not really a good project that had citywide benefits. And also indicated that they thought the $50,000 that staff had originally proposed was insufficient. And so requested that staff come back and say to Comcast, we think it's $75,000 is necessary in order to compensate the city. Yeah.
So, we did come up with the 75,000 because what it does is it sets in stone our agreement that we don't want, that we're going to accept that there's no Springfield Comcast service center there. I think part of it, though, is there's a discussion. I think the discussion is broader than what, you know, the 75,000, because there's some of us that are very keen on it. It's a community-wide asset. So how it's broken out, how it's described here is maybe not how we'll end up with, you know, it makes sense to use for library services, which maybe could be tied to services that include internet services, that include computer services, things like that, that are technology oriented, and I'm very focused on that. So how we divide it up is still up for discussion, and Lori can help out with that, is we haven't decided how that money would get spent, but we definitely, the 75,000 was to compensate for we give up our right to have a Springfield Center.
So it's basically the franchise is for 10 years. So it would basically be saying that there's no service center in Springfield. And the idea is Springfield residents, they have to go to Valley River. If they're going to go to a service center, they have to go to Valley River. And there's a lot of people who don't have their own cars, have to use public transit, and it's not convenient. It's not convenient to go to a service center at all, but it's certainly not convenient for Springfield residents to truck all the way over to Valley River Center. So it was a big loss that Springfield felt they could use resources other ways. So that's still negotiations around that point. Eugene also is very adamant that they not lose that service center. And the way the business is going, the way Tim has explained it, is fewer and fewer people are actually having to go to the service center. You can go to UPS drop sites, and a lot of stuff is done on the phone, and customer service people come to your home, but we're not quite there yet. And so there is a provision in that Comcast proposed to possibly take the Springfield one out in the next 10 years. And Eugene and Springfield obviously are both pretty adamant that we don't allow that to automatically happen. Maybe that they would come to the commission in 5 years if they felt like that was something that they wanted to do, and they could come and ask to remove it from the franchise. But we certainly didn't want to have some automatic thing in 5 years where the Valley River Center would also be closing. So that was, the service center was a big issue. Customer service provisions and the equity provisions are addendums that Comcast had proposed to put into the new franchise. A lot of what they're trying to do is have a lot of their franchises be consistent with each other. So when they're negotiating a franchise in Portland, and they're negotiating a franchise in Eugene, and negotiating a franchise in Bend, they'll have similar addenda, similar provisions for customer service, similar provisions for equity. And so we get that. I mean, that makes a lot of sense that they want to have that consistency. But when we looked at their addenda, the customer service and equity provisions, there were changes that we would suggest to both of those addendas. The customer service one, we have Section 12 as our customer service provisions in the current franchise. And there are provisions in there dealing with process and requirement for a Eugene Service Center that we weren't ready to let go. So our proposal was, yeah, we'll go ahead and put that addendum in, but keep Section 12 in the franchise, have them both work together, and make sure that they're not inconsistent. The equity provisions are, they reflect a federal requirement that local governments treat service providers similarly. So if a service provider's in the jurisdiction and a new one comes in, you can't give them this great deal that you're not giving to the incumbent one. The equity provision addendum that they've proposed, we think expands that requirement beyond cable services. So requires equity for stuff beyond what a franchise is supposed to be dealing with, which is just cable services. So what we've done is we've proposed revisions to that equity addendum that narrows it to what's required by law. And we're still working on that with Comcast. The last big issue is fee reviews moving forward. So one of the confusing points that we had was in the current franchise, we had two provisions, a provision for fee reviews and a provision for audits. And it wasn't really clear, at least to me in retrospect, what was what. What's an audit, what's a fee review, and what does that mean? And the significance in the current franchise was that if it was an audit, can you get this right? If it's an audit, the local government would have to pay for it. If it was a fee review, then they would have to pay for it. And so they were saying it was an audit so that they wouldn't have to pay for it. So we wanted to get rid of that misunderstanding, which they do too, and just call it one thing, whether it's an audit or a fee review. We're just going to have one type of review. And I think we're both in agreement that we need to do something like that to clarify that. And that we need to be clear on how many fee reviews are allowed during the franchise term. So in a lot of franchises that Comcast has throughout the state, it's possible to do one like every 2 years. So during a 10-year term, you would do like up to 4 or 5. In the current franchise, what we had agreed to was that we would only do one during the franchise term, but that Comcast would pay for it. So we're looking at that as precedent, but there are more common practice these days of allowing reviews whenever the local government wants to, but what Comcast does is they say, okay, well, we'll pay for it if the underpayment is more than 5% of the fees. So if you look at these numbers, and Ashpond School Co., for instance, is the private consultant comes in and says, oh, well, you underpaid by 8%, then arguably Comcast would have to pay for it. But if Ashpond School Co. comes back and says, oh, you did a pretty good job, you only underpaid by 2%, then the local government would have to pay for it. So that's how a lot of their franchises are structured right now, which we're not exactly comfortable with because usually it's under 4 or 5%. So they're saying they're going to pay for it if it reaches that level, but it doesn't usually. And then you're arguing about, is it 4% or is it 5% or is it more or less? So what we've proposed currently is that we would only do 2 fee reviews during the franchise term, and that they would pay for them, but possibly we would cap each one at $50,000 each. So that's kind of where we are. And that we have a certain period of look back. So you're looking back 3 years, and it would apply to the years before the review happened. So that's another issue that we're still working on. And I think that might be it. Is there anything handy?
No, I think that's
So I don't know if any questions, comments?
For feedback?
Yeah.
I like all of the staff suggestions, partly because the big companies now have quite a few tax breaks that I think that they take advantage of. I certainly spend enough time talking with Comcast trying to negotiate what the heck I pay personally. And I have to say, the city does a wonderful job when you can't come to agreement, that you can always use that phone number on the bill and get someone locally to help you out. So thank you to the, for me, it's City of Springfield staff. I'm comfortable with that too. I'm comfortable with probably the 50,000. I don't like the under, only if it's under, you know, the 4 or 5%. No. What I'm trying to say is the staff recommendations, I'm fine with the staff recommendations, trying to go forward, because I think it's fair in terms of us, and I know maybe some other folks do it a little bit differently, but they're a big company and they can try to accommodate the customers that we have to accommodate also. And every jurisdiction everywhere runs things a little bit differently, and somehow or another we all figure out how to do it. So I would recommend, from our perspective, I'm looking at Hillary, that we like the staff's recommendations and stick with those.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're kind of a drop in the bucket for the size of Comcast, and it's very difficult to affect change, of course. Yeah, but one of their things that are causing us grief, and I'm sure every other franchise grief, is their business model of luring people into package buys, and then suddenly their bill is $20 to $30 higher per month. And so, of course, who gets the complaints? We do. And so, you know, you've been getting the tax breaks. We've been getting the complaints. And so I think, you know, I support the mayor in her position, of course. And I wish there was some way we could impact Comcast, saying this is an unpleasant business model that affects our customers negatively, because a senior citizen doesn't have $20 or $30 increases to add to their pile of bills. And that this can happen out of the blue. They did work counting the months that their package ran out, and without any kind of explanation, their bill goes up $20 or $30. So, you know, like I said, it makes me feel better to make the speech. You drop one drop in the bucket.
Any other thoughts? So, a question I have regarding is there a point on? I mean, I'm Comcast, but my 25-year-old, almost 26-year-old son and his new wife are not. They're streamers. They go to everywhere else.
Streamers.
Yeah. And so they're not subscribing to Comcast, but yet they get anything they want and need as far as that's concerned. So do we know what the demographics are who are continuing with Comcast and where the breakdown is? And
I don't know the demographics. I
Yeah.
do know that we are in this, I don't want to say bubble, but this period of time where there are more people streaming and not using Comcast and getting off of Comcast, getting off of cable. And so there was actually a listserv that Pam and I are both on, where the question was asked, are these revenues going to start going down? And some places are and some places aren't. I think there was a response from one that said they're just continuing to go up and they haven't seen the drop. So I think, personally, I think it is coming, and when we go to conferences, they say it's coming. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
But more and more are going streaming.
Yeah. Out of curiosity more than anything. So,
Yeah.
Anything else to add? Okay.
Nope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, there's anything else for the good of the order, then we are going to adjourn.
Well done.
Have a great day.
Am I right?